We have another question in from Ian Kirby, which is closely related to what we've just talked about. Ian's comment is, senior management say they want pervasive BI and expect IT to deliver. However, the commitment from managers throughout the business is low when we try to gain business help while implementing BI through data warehousing and use of the purchase tools. How can we convince managers in the business that BI is not just a job for IT and get over the cultural barriers?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and is often a challenge. I think that to build on what we were just talking about, it's great if you can get the executive level sponsorship, and it sounds like that might be in place in this case. I think then building on that, it's really important to sort of articulate a vision of how this data warehouse solution is going to add value for the organisation, and to build a communications approach and plan to try and win the hearts and minds of more management layers within the business, that this does actually have a genuine business value attached to it, and if necessary use the sort of more senior management levels to be delivering some of those messages to their own management teams, and really think about it as you would with any sort of communications and marketing campaign about what are the right messages to be pushing top down, and what are the ways that you can do more kind of bottom up, building communication, building confidence with prototypes, etc., to really get across what people are going to get and why it will be valuable for them.
Okay. All right.
It's a good point actually about marketing. Internal marketing, I think, is, again, I've seen that in some projects where the BI team take it upon themselves, if you like, to evangelise on the solution and be their own marketing department. Create newsletters, use the internal portal to sort of advertise what's going on, what the benefits are, and as Alice said, what the other guys in other departments are doing now. That's can be extremely useful.
Yeah, absolutely, because often you'll find you have a department and there's one person who is really keen to get this stuff. They get it, they tell everybody else how they use it, and they really become your advocate in the department. And it's about pushing things broadly so you can find that person who's really going to take it. Sometimes these people have the opposite effect, and you can have one person in the department who doesn't want information and thinks it's a load of rubbish, and they actually they work against. They can kind of work against it, but the internal marketing, as these guys have said, is absolutely key. For the questioner, Ian, I would suggest the trouble is sponsorship really involves putting some resources behind BI. It doesn't just mean, I've called myself the sponsor and I have, told you to go off and do it. So that's the message that you have the challenge to get across, really. I don't know, perhaps if you could approach somebody that's like a direct report of the sponsor, and say, right, good news, your boss says he's happy for us to do this. Let's look at how much of your time and of your direct reports that I need, but really, the business have to put some time to it. There's no other way of doing it.
Yeah. Now, presumably anybody in senior management is always counting the beans, and to provide that sort of sponsorship, they might be very happy to do that until they see the prospective bill. Return on investment. Interestingly, only about 17% of the people who responded to our poll questions cited cost savings over time as a real benefit for pervasive business intelligence, which implies that you're not too bothered about how much it costs as long as it can be shown to deliver real business advantage. But that's the key question, isn't it? How can it be shown to deliver real business advantage? How do you present that investment case to senior management?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I think when an organisation is in the kind of child, teenager maturity stage, then cost saving is always a good place to go. I mean, if you have, often happens in finance departments, you have a lot of quite highly trained professional accountants, and they're doing a lot of Excel mangling of data, changing hierarchies, sending spreadsheets about, loading them, that sort of thing. A cost saving is always a good way to go. So you say, look at all these people, all of the analytic skills they could be bringing to looking at the data, let's free them up and let's automate this and look at it in a cost-saving term. As the organisations come to more of an enterprise data warehouse approach, then ROI and return on investment and actual business benefits are something they're a little bit more open to. The challenge is it's quite difficult to prove until you've got them. So the further along the maturity curve you are, the easier it is to do. But if you look in something like supply chain, you can look at reduced inventory, cost saved on materials. If you look at procurement, you can look at discounts. You know, I know of a case study where a lot of different procurement was happening all over a group. Anything like that where you get a single version of the truth of what's happening. You can show phenomenal cost savings. Finance in terms of cash, speeding up cash collection, reducing debt outstanding. These have big numbers attached to them. So start with cost control and then move on to kind of, you know, business growth metrics.
And Richard, we discussed this earlier before we went on air, that there are tangible benefits from a financial perspective, but there are intangible benefits as well. But at the same time, there are additional costs, because a lot of people have pointed out in the poll question that it's a lack of understanding, and you know, people need training. They need to be made to understand what these tools can do to help them, and that's going to cost as well on top of the software licensing. So return on investment, I mean, from your perspective, from the user cases you've seen out there, where does it come from?
Yeah, usually it comes from two areas. One is productivity improvements, so making the business more efficient. That's roughly about half the benefit comes from that. The second half is usually process improvements, so we do something better than we used to do previously. Now, of course, if you're going to measure process improvements, it's important that you're benchmarked against something. So one of the things is you've got to kind of understand how you're doing things now, how badly is that being done, or you know, and then able to kind of measure the process improvement that you're going to get from it. The productivity ones tend to be a lot easier. One of the biggest single productivity benefits you can get is just ease of access to information. What's happening today in organisations that don't have, you know, BI pervasively is that people are getting this information together, but they're doing it in a horribly manual way. You know, they're cutting and pasting information from multiple systems, and they're not doing their day job. They're doing, you know, they're becoming manual data integrators. That can be cut at a stroke with easy access to information, and you can get more of your people doing their job, spending less time integrating data and more time analysing that data, and of course making better business decisions, which in turn leads to process improvement. So the whole thing becomes a bit of a virtuous circle from that point of view. The intangible benefits are interesting as well. Of course, naturally much harder to measure. But things like trustworthiness of information, as Nick mentioned, you know, data is hugely important to the success of all IT systems, and particularly BI, which kind of focuses a sort of really magnifying glass on the quality of your data and really will expose any issues are there. So being able to address that, I think, is important as well, and moving from a point maybe where people trust their information, difficult to measure but hugely beneficial to the organisation.
And just to add briefly to that, I absolutely agree that there's always an area that's quite easy to measure and can be correlated back to the BI implementation, but then the other part, which is probably at least 50% potentially, if not more, around better business outcomes, let's call it. I think that is sometimes, it's definitely harder to measure, and I think it's about striking the right balance. I think sometimes organisations put it almost in the too hard box and don't do anything with it, which I think then means you've got a potential difficulty with your business case, because the 50% that you can measure might not be enough to justify the investment. And I think if you try and build too scientific a business case on the other 50% around business outcomes, you'll probably fail because you can't be completely scientific. So I think it's about striking the right balance in the middle, where you do enough due diligence on what are going to be the better business outcomes to a level that your management team can understand and buy into. Then that's generally enough to then get their kind of buy into what you're trying to do and get their approval.
Okay. And you touched on this before, Nick, but obviously BI software, it pulls in all sorts of different data from all sorts of different sources, structured, unstructured, you know, various spreadsheets, databases, everything you can think of. How can you be sure you can take all of that data and put it into one central repository, if at all, and then run some analytic software on it, which then produces a meaningful report? Is that an exact science, or there's always got to be some sort of margin of error, isn't there?
I think it comes down to good design at the outset. So Alice made the point that your BI solution will always evolve, which I agree with, but I think it's about working out in any particular phase or release of implementation, what information are you going to have in there, and then if you apply good design principles to develop a conceptual data model and then a logical data model and then physicalize that, then you can actually make sure that all of your sources do integrate correctly. I think the thing that to really do is to design that as well to be flexible, to expand over time, because in every BI implementation I've seen that's been successful, once you've implemented one particular area of data, you always then think, oh, well, it would be nice now to have some more data from another area of the business or from external or from competitors, whatever it might be, really building up the information over time so that it becomes more of an enterprise view.
Same question to you, Richard.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, I think absolutely it's an iterative approach. It's got to be built over time. As I think I meant to mention, one of the key things that successful organisations have in business intelligence is a sort of a formal way of capturing business requirements and changing business requirements and being able to sort of formalise that process, if you like, because I think without that, then it's often easy to deliver a solution that doesn't meet the needs of the business and becomes increasingly sort of unaligned, you know, with what's happening. So yeah, I agree with everything Nick said there.
And I think the other key tip is probably not to try and build the enterprise data model in one step. So it's actually a good idea to find a functional area or a data area and then do all of the design for that, implement that, and then think about how to extend it, because there's been a number of, I think, examples of organisations in the past that have tried to build an enterprise data model from scratch, and it just becomes too all-consuming and too difficult and gets put in the too hard bucket. So I think building it incrementally in stages is a very good suggestion.